Every Monday I kind of review a movie. This one's different because your grandfather was the subject of the movie.
When he was talking to David Stone, who was a fictional character played by Sam Worthington, I don't want anything in that book to like. I mean, it sounded exactly like him. I was highly impressed. I mean, Harvey is Jewish. He is about the same age as my grandfather at the end of his life, and boy, he had that down real well. So I thought I was listening to my grandfather, to be honest with you, especially in the deli, because we were always in a deli when I saw him in Miami Beach every year. So
that would be the meeting place then. That was pretty realistic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you know, I thought that opening scene, I thought he was great in that. You're not going to reveal anything. You're not going to talk to anybody, and this book is not going to be revealed until I die. And the way he delivered those lines was terrific.
Spot on. He had some material to study. There's a few videos of my grandfather online, close to that age anyway. When he walked into the deli, and it shows that scene, and people.
Guys like my father, who's passed away now, and some of the guys in the life that I knew, and I asked him about Meyer, they kind of downplay his role. I think it's more of this Italian pride, you know, that no, this was an Italian thing, and we created it all, and if you weren't Italian, you really didn't have as much juice as people say, and that goes for Meyer Lansky also. But I kind of, you know, my research and my, you know, investigation of this over the years, that's not true. I think Meyer and Bugsy and Rothstein, I think they played a lot.
Luciano, my grandfather, he had a great respect for him instantly because they met over on Hester Street when, you know, in those days, you had the Italian, Irish, and Jewish sections. And the Jewish guys traditionally gave up their money and, you know, they were intimidated. And my grandfather was. So they had an instant respect for each other. He was ready to throw down and said, "You're not getting my money to cross this neighborhood." And that's how it formed. That's how it started, you know.
There's a scene in the movie, and this must be after Luciano created the commission. And we know we do credit him with that. That's a fact. But there is a scene in the movie when the Italians, Meyer Lansky, and they say even the Irish were sitting down at this syndicate, and they were the ones that were deciding what organized crime would be like in America. Coming to kind of current time, back in the 80s, I knew a few guys like, you know, McIntosh was close with Carmine Persico. Obviously, Jimmy Burke was close with a lot of guys in that family. They weren't Italian, and they didn't have a seat at the table. They couldn't sit there because they weren't made guys in that life. I don't know if that scene was right or not, because I don't know that anybody would be able to be sitting at that table, the mafia commission table. It really is only made up of mob guys, made men, I should say, the bosses of the families throughout the country. But on the other hand, I do believe, okay, that they did sit down together and they talked about policy and gambling and things that were happening during that time. So I believe Meyer played, and the Jewish organized crime people played, a bigger role than some made guys want to admit to.
I think definitely so. You know, especially at their time when they created the syndicate, basically with Lucky Luciano, Ben, and my grandfather. I'm sure there was people who didn't like it, you know, but they were the top people, I believe. And my grandpa had Luciano's ear all the time. They were good friends. He was definitely, you know, on a lot of big decisions. You know, that's kind of been proven.
What do you know about the relationship between Benny Siegel and your grandfather? Because they go way back, and in the movie, it portrays Bugsy as kind of the enforcer for your grandfather. Did you see it that way? Did you hear it being that way? Did your grandfather ever talk to you about it?
No, I never actually talked to him about anything to do with his life in that background. What I know from, you know, my father, and I was Millicent Siegel, who was Ben's youngest daughter. She passed away a few years ago. Yes, in the early days, he definitely was an enforcer for my grandfather. But Ben also had a lot of confidence. He wasn't just one-sided. You know, they always say, "Oh, my grandfather was the accountant." Well, all those guys knew odds. They all were good with accounting. You know, they tagged that to Myers a lot. But, you know, Ben knew odds. He knew finance. You know, my grandfather had to fight at one time also. They never say much about that. I mean, in his younger years, he had to stick up for himself physically, obviously. So
yeah, he was a street guy also. So I imagine.
Yeah, the one at the early days. I mean, they all together. They met down on Delancey Street when the craps game went wrong, and Ben grabbed a gun and was going to shoot an Irish police officer. My grandfather said, "Throw it down. You're going to get arrested." He actually was the only person he really listened to was my grandfather. So being a few years older than he was, I think maybe had something to do with it. But
yeah, I just want to mention at this point that I don't know if I should say this with any amount of pride, but really the birth of Cosa Nostra, the mafia in this country, really happened in New York. That's where everybody that was anybody pretty much came out of. Your grandfather, Siegel, Luciano, Capone, all of those guys, they came out of New York.
Yes.
And they spread throughout the country. So, like I say, I don't know if I should say that with pride. Probably people get mad at me, but, you know, it's the
maybe
truth.
The guys from Chicago.
Yeah, well.
No, probably not.
Even some of the guys from Chicago originated from New York.
That's right.
That's where Capone came from. He was born in Brooklyn. So.
Right, that's true, yes. And Johnny Torrio, you know.
Really?
Sometimes.
That's interesting.
It is, yeah. And I came up with that also, you know, so my father was open to all that as well, because he didn't really have a great Jewish upbringing. He said he was in a temple once, I think. That was it. So surprisingly, I'm sure people don't think of it that way. But
so let me ask you again, you know, when we're talking about the movie and, you know, separated fiction from reality, they really portrayed him as a cold-hearted gangster. I mean, he was a killer in the movie. Did you see it that way?
No, that's total, not true at all. Obviously, he knew, you know, that his partners, and including Ben, you know, had ways of getting results. He never was a part of that. No, he was helpful to people. But he was aware. He knew what went on. Personally himself, no, he was very helpful to people. He wanted to see people progress and do well. And, you know, if you look at his clubs, around the time that Ben was building the Flamingo here in Las Vegas, he was back in Florida. And like I was saying, with the communities, he didn't want average people to gamble, because he knew that would cause problems with wives and kids, and he didn't want average people losing their money. He just wanted the wealthy that wanted to gamble to be there. So he steered them away from all. You know, he didn't allow prostitution inside his clubs because that would bring federal problems. He's just very logical and smart. You know, if everybody benefited, there would be, you know, it would help his business as well as everybody else. So.
Yeah, I believe that. And there is a scene in the movie where Meyer is basically telling his crew or his associates there that somebody owes you money. We don't want to beat him up anymore. We want to help him pay us. And he was kind of turning, you know, that thuggery of the street life into more of a business type of operation. And I believe that. I believe that of him, and that was smart, obviously.
That's true, obviously. Yeah, you know, I have many stories my father used to tell me in the 40s in New York that they'd be walking down the street and all of a sudden you grab the over talking to someone you saw, you'd see him take some money out of his pocket and give it to the guy. You know, that's my dad's observation. 13, 14 years old. He saw that many times. Very helpful.
There was one scene in the movie that I especially didn't like. One thing that I do think was true, the government, the FBI, Justice Department was after your grandfather for most of his adult life. And they were never able to catch up with him. Now, I got to tell you, that doesn't happen by accident. Your grandfather had to be pretty shrewd, pretty smart. They were trying to track his holdings in European countries that he had, gambling operations. Do you know that to be a fact? Did he have gambling operations in Europe that he controlled or owned?
For a short time, I believe in England or London, they tried to have something. A lot of the stuff, which I don't know any more than anybody else. I think that's true. Yes. A lot of that money was in cash. I know his biggest love was Cuba. He wanted that to really go over well. Vegas, he was, removed from here. His brother was out here, the Jack, to watch over things. But he really liked Florida, and Cuba was his dream to have. Yeah, that would have been Las Vegas if that would have gone over without, cash flow coming in. But yes, he was, Monte Carlo, UK, worldwide interest in gambling. Some were bigger than others, obviously. Some lasted long.
There was a scene when Meyer was walking with an emissary from Batista, who was going to be the president, and they were telling him they wanted him to take over gambling operations in Cuba because it would be legalized. And I believe there was a lot of truth to that. And your grandfather did play a principal role in Cuba during that time before Castro took over, with the revolution. What do you know about that?
Well, he did, and he was there prior to 1957 with Batista, because Batista was there twice. He loved the Cuban people. He loved the fact that it wasn't the United States. He didn't like accounting to. That's one of the reasons he wasn't real prominent in Vegas or the United States. He liked his business, kept quiet, and he didn't want people investigating him. So Cuba was a perfect place for him at that time. 57 when he built the Habana Riviera, and then of course a few years later he had Fidel Castro take over. He had a great 3 years.
Formed that, so I think that's another thing in the movie that's not accurate.
Right? Yeah, no, I don't think so. Well, you had Albert Anastasia. I think I'm pretty sure they needed a law enforcement arm because the public was getting pretty. I think more in Chicago than New York during Prohibition. There was bodies piling up, and they just couldn't have that anymore. Especially after the Valentine's Day massacre. I think that that was a real problem. So they had to find a more efficient way.
Let me clarify. Murder Inc. was real. I mean, there was no question about that. The only thing I'm questioning is the fact that in the movie your grandfather was portrayed as the person that started it. That he got his Jewish friends together like Lepke and Bookwalter, and they started it. But you're right. Anastasia was a big part of that. It definitely existed, but I don't think your grandfather should be credited with forming it.
No, I don't think so either. That just wasn't within him.